Let's talk about some other stuff. Paddy Pimblett defeated Tony Ferguson via unanimous decision. Once again, Ferguson looked good at times, but most of the fight, he was simply overwhelmed. Ferguson, no doubt, is a popular fighter, and he wasn't finished in this fight. But once again, we ask, is his time in the UFC done? Or furthermore, should he just retire? Goes, you get the first take.
Well, I mean, the boss himself said it, right? He thinks it's time to retire. There are things, of course, that you could do. You can give him matchups that he might win, but at this point, what is that going to accomplish? It's a high salary to be throwing somebody on a fight with on the prelims or something, right? I don't think that's going to work out. And if you look outside of the UFC, Bellator is not really an option anymore. Yeah, PFL, it's a big name for them. They could probably put him on maybe the pay-per-view series. Maybe you give him one or something like that, but you're setting them up to put somebody else over. I honestly don't think Tony Ferguson would want to fight anywhere other than the UFC. The one thing I will say is if he's a man of his word and he sticks to it and says, look, I know I haven't been doing well. I want to go out one more, maybe a UFC 300, and you give him somebody of his caliber, I could see something like that going down. I could see the UFC bending and saying, okay, we'll do that. But just to keep giving him fights and for him to come out and give these performances where every performance he's showing us something a little different, he's getting a little slower, just, things are not there for him. It's a dangerous sport, and I don't want to see somebody who accomplished so much in his career be remembered for the downfall. And I think that's starting to happen right now. And we're starting to forget just how badass at one point he was. And I don't want that to happen. So hopefully, I think this is the end for him.
Mike, is El Kukui done in the UFC, or furthermore, should he just retire?
Oh man, this is such a bummer to talk about. Hey, like I think it's got to be, I guess, both. I mean, I don't want to see him competing at this level anymore. I mean, there's not a whole lot redeeming about this performance. He did have a little bit of a moment in the third round when Paddy was gassing out pretty badly in that moment, which was not a great look on his side. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot there that made you feel like something has changed. Things are different. They're talking about on commentary how he doesn't have like a real coach. David Goggins, for all the talk leading in, was completely useless in the corner during the fight. So like none of this really helped him going forward. So yeah, I don't know what to say. He's tied with BJ Penn now for the longest losing skid in UFC history. Unless the UFC wants to take BJ Penn out of the record books from that dubious honor and put Tony Ferguson in there alone. Maybe they want to give him another fight, but sitting here right now, like you look at these lightweights, what makes sense for him, who you could match up. Paddy Pimblett suggested after, like he could beat Drakkar Klose, he could defeat Marco Madsen. I'm not even really sure about those ones, man. Like those are still tough fights for him. There's not a lot of the lightweights out of 100 plus the UFC has on its roster that I feel confident Tony Ferguson could beat and be super competitive with. So to me, that signifies the end. What are we continuing to do this for? If he needs the money, and that's the situation, that is, of course, sad given someone with like 22 UFC fights who was a top contender as headline shows, who held that interim belt. Like if that's what we're continuing to do this for, that's, I guess, another conversation that's concerning. But there's people out there who will pay Tony Ferguson for better or worse, whether it's, BKFC or Karate Combat or an MMA organization. Like there's places out there he can make money if that is the only driving factor for him at this point, really. But if we're even sniffing conversations about him being at a top level again and all that stuff, like it's just not there anymore. So I would like to see him retire, and I think that's what he needs to do at this point. For the betterment of his future and his health and all that stuff. Kind of guts me to say, because Tony Ferguson is a fan favorite and a legend of the sport, but kind of like BJ Penn as we went down the wire there, like people say like they're hurting their legacy. That's always kind of a conversation with these fighters who go late down. And you look at BJ Penn and you're like, man, you still think of like he was, one of the youngest black belts from America, like in the world, and first two division champion, had all these amazing moments and stuff like that. You try to think about that a little bit more than seeing him get absolutely destroyed in all these fights down the stretch. And you wonder how much he hurt his legacy. This just feels a little bit different with Tony because he didn't reach those exact same heights. And it just seeing it in this sense is just getting worse and worse. So I do feel like he is damaging his legacy by continuing to fight. And I don't want to see any more of that.
Oatmeal26 says, please retire Tony. Joseph Boza says, this was a gift. Tony should retire. That's 7 in a row. MMA Voodoo says, Tony won't stop fighting. He doesn't know what else to do. Joseph Boza comes back and says, Tony basically set up Patty for July to get a top 10 guy. JC Nixon says, Tony is entering his prime, guys. He's just getting started. Good one. All right. So listen, in the B-roll, he's fighting Anthony Pettis. Great fight in Anaheim, California, about 3-4 years ago. And look at Pettis. He's gone and boxed Roy Jones. Now, granted, he's a striker. Tony comes more from the wrestling game, but he's done something, right? He's gone to PFL, cashed some big checks, went and boxed Roy Jones Jr., just did karate combat this past weekend. Goes was there. I suppose there are some other ways for him to make some money because he is super popular. But anyway, let's get back to you guys. You guys are the stars of the show. Danny, what are your thoughts, man? Yes, Tuvo with the UFC, retire altogether. What's up?
Yeah, no mas, Tony. No mas. It's done. I mean, 7-fight losing streak. That's a lot of losses. And not only that, but he, prior to this one, which was a decision, he was finished in his last 3. And we're not talking about, because before it was, okay, Benil Dariush, he's knocking on the door of a title shot. Michael Chandler fought for a belt. Charles Oliveira, former champion. Like, okay. But now we're entering a territory of different caliber, and he's not cutting it there either. Like, sorry, but Paddy Pimblett, big star, big name, but he's not a top 15 fighter. He's not. I would say he's probably more like a top 30 UFC lightweight, or maybe 25. Wow. I mean, just look at the rankings, George. I mean, look, can Paddy Pimblett beat number 15 Drew Dober? I don't think so. Bobby Green 14? I don't think so. 13 Moicano? I don't think so. St. Denis at 12? I don't think so. 11 Dos Anjos?
No, I hear you. So. I hear you when you said top 30.
Yeah, I mean, there's other guys that are just, knocking on the door of the rankings that I think that beat Pimblett, say like a Joel Alvarez or someone like that, that are maybe more in the top 20. I think Paddy's probably around top 25. Look, what are we going to do at this point? Like, the Legends division was supposed to be Nate Diaz, was supposed to be kind of Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett, and he's not cutting it there either. And it's tough to say because Tony Ferguson is one of my favorite fighters of all time. His prime in 2017, that's when it was his peak, when he defeated Kevin Lee. I mean, it was just something else. If you didn't witness it, you really missed out on a remarkable run, and it's sad to see him at this stage. And like Mike said, I hope that he's okay financially. I mean, he fought for a belt. He headlined numerous events, 20 plus fights in the UFC. Hopefully he's good financially, and he's just been doing this because he wants to fight. If that's the case, no more, Tony. Go enjoy. You did enough. Your time's up. 40 years old, 7-fight losing streak. I mean, what else can I say, right? Like, I don't want to see Tony Ferguson fight again. I think this is it for him.
Mm-hmm. Black Connection says he was such a killer in his day. We all agree. Oatmeal26 says Tony versus Lazon, 300 double retirement fight. I heard Lazon tried to get on the Boston card, Oatmeal, and they denied him. So I don't know how that works.
Yeah,
but
I think he's done.
I think 300 is pretty special. I liked what Goz said. Dana White said in the press conference, wait till you hear the first fight. You'll say, holy cow, 300 is pretty special. And I was just thinking, why not Jim Miller versus Tony Ferguson? If Ferguson can fly to Las Vegas, look Dana in the eye. He doesn't have to convince him that he puts in the work. He puts in the work. It's his tactics, falling to his back, those easy takedowns that he doesn't fight off. And then he lays there and he crosses his legs and it's a full guard. Like, he doesn't open up his guard. He doesn't put feet on the hips. He doesn't try any sweeps. He tries the blades, but the blades weren't doing nothing to Paddy Pimblett. He was easy to mark up too. The blood was trickling from the nose. It was from punches. It wasn't from any of the blades. I just think some of the tactics are just like from 2017. He needs to get up, and use his wrestling and put Paddy on his back. I think that would be the better way to go, Mike.
I was just saying, this is just the reality, man. We're talking about a nearly 40-year-old lightweight. Name me anyone in the history of MMA who has really kept it together at that age in this weight class and compete at the highest level. Like, yeah, there's a few guys who can win out there. And, you talk about Jim Miller, like, he's obviously getting up there in age too, and he's still able to pick up wins. But, like, would Tony Ferguson beat Nicholas Moda? Maybe. Like, I don't know. But, like, is the UFC going to set that fight up? Tony Ferguson, this is like the problem with the sport too, to a degree, right? Like, the more success you have, the harder it is to go back. And
Mhm.
they'll try, like they tried to do that. They've done this. They did it with Bobby Green. They did it with Paddy Pimblett. And what's the step back from Paddy Pimblett? Like anything there, you're just looking at it being like, okay, like they're just trying to get Tony a win against anything here, which if you want to do that, but what are you setting up for the future? What are you trying to build off? What are you doing this? You're just giving the guy a nice payday. And if the UFC wanted to do that, if as you were kind of laying out there, George, he goes to Vegas, he sits down with Dana and Hunter and Sean and Mick and says, guys, like, I will do one more fight. Maybe it's the last fight on his contract. I know they gave him a new deal for the Nate Diaz fight when all that chaos happened with a pay bump. And maybe that's why he's continuing to push, because maybe he's getting money, as we related to earlier, that actually is setting him up for something forward. But if they have that conversation, say, give me one more fight, give me a winnable fight, and I promise win or lose, I'm going to retire. It's going to be the end, all that stuff. Maybe they could be persuaded, but how far do you have to go down to find someone that is at this point in 2024? It will be a winnable fight for Tony Ferguson.
Dude, and
Yeah.
Jimbo is up in age, but he can still thump. That dude can still knock people out. I don't want to see Tony Ferguson get finished, take more punishment. Remember, not that long ago, this was a guy that was having mental health issues, and he's got a ton of damage on his body. I don't want to see him fight, period. If he does fight, if they do that UFC 300 thing, I'm looking at the roster right now. Maybe, just maybe, the only fight that I'll be able to stomach might be one against Clay Guida. Outside of that, I don't like him against anyone.
I hear what you guys are saying, but I will say this: he needs to get with a proper coach. He's just not getting in between rounds. He's not getting anything. His tactics are antiquated.
George. What's that going to do for him at this point? Like he
Well,
goes
remember a
to
few years ago, he shopped himself around. He went to New Mexico. He stopped in Las Vegas, and then what did he do? He went back to himself. At least a guy like Clay Guida, who's he got? Holdsworth, Danny Castillo. He's got Joey Rodriguez. He's got proper coaches who are coming up with game plans that kind of have at least a plan B and a plan C. We're seeing a rinse and repeat. And I don't know. At least that's what I would tell him if I was a promoter. I'd say, yeah, I know you put in the work, but it doesn't seem like your style of fighting is winning fights, and you're going to get hurt that way. So hopefully you can get with a coach or something like that. I don't know, but him coaching himself and doing all that, it's not working.
That opinion is right, George. What you're saying is right. It's just it was right 2 years ago is when maybe he could have made that adjustment, but now the ship has sailed. But you're right. Like every Tony Ferguson fight at the end, he's giving you some kind of excuse as to somebody else that was giving him problems or why that didn't work. But he rarely makes the switches within himself. His fighting style is what's put him in these bad situations. And he's never made that adjustment. It's kind of too late now. Even if you give him Clay Guida, I mean, it ain't gonna, I don't know that's gonna say. Clay Guida actually looked pretty damn good in his last fight.
Yeah,
but you got to give him somebody. It's got to be somebody there.
That's what I mean by that.
Yeah, it's got to be somebody of that caliber if you have to give him somebody. But
I'm actually into the Joe Lazon fight if they do it, and I'm calling for him to retire too. But I'm just saying if he somehow squeezes out another one, I think they gave Sam Malvey the 8th or 9th shot. And like I say, Dana's at these press conferences and he sees one guy getting all of this applause and cheers and flowers. All that is part of an equation of pay-per-view sales and ticket sales. I'm sure he already said he wants him to retire, but I'm telling you, guys walk into that office and demand stuff all the time. He got it out of Liddell. He wanted him to put in a proper camp. He got it out of Alvey, I guess. Alistair Overeem sat in the lobby for 8 hours, they said. He made him sit there on purpose. And he said, don't worry, my chin's good. He actually aligned himself with a proper camp. He went to Colorado and said, I'm working with wrestlers and this, and he extended his career. Anyway.
At the end of the day, too, I guess just one of the final points on this is like, I don't know his contract status. If he still has fights on his contract, the UFC has a choice to make. They either have to offer him fights and give him another fight or release him, and he will potentially go do his thing elsewhere. So Dana can sit up there and he can say whatever he wants. I'd love to see him retire. That's why he wasn't, saying like he has to retire. He's going to retire. Like I would love to see him because he doesn't have full control of this situation. If Tony is owed more fights and asks for them, the UFC has a contractual obligation to give it to him. So that's, I think, one of the tipping points here too. If they want to release him, that would be the bigger message. If they said, hey, Tony, you are not capable at this level anymore, but it goes back to what you just said there. He's got a huge fan base. He still has traction, all that stuff. Does the UFC want to give that away to another promotion? And that's kind of the catch-22 of something like this.
Hey guys, real quick. I know this is crazy. Let's say he's done in the UFC. Are you guys into PFL pay-per-views? Ferguson versus Pettis 2. Thumbs up or thumbs down, quick.
Nope.
Thumbs down.
versus Pettis.
Really? Wow. All right. I thought I
But
was gonna get
if
fist bumps
he's
on
gonna
that one.
leave, if he's gonna leave the UFC and he has to do something, I'd rather it be in MMA than see him in like BKFC or
Yeah.
Karate Combat.
I'd
where
like to see him versus Pettis in PFL. I thought you guys would be into that one, but all right, I struck out. Let's talk about the winning side. It was Patty. He said this was lose-lose for him. Despite winning on Saturday night, did he in fact lose, guys? Goes?
I don't think so. You know, I thought even before the fight started, he came in great shape. You know, he definitely transformed his body. I think that was the
Yeah.
first part of the victory.
More jacked.
In the fight, he showed some improvements in his game. The cardio did start to slip at the end, but you know, I guess it maybe wasn't the perfect performance. But I thought he did pretty good. Um, a finish, I think, is what would have said that he's ready for the next level. Right? The performance says he belongs to be there. A finish says he's ready to take the next step. But there's no looking back. You know, once you get a name like Tony Ferguson, you can't just go back and start fighting other guys like that. You're gonna have to move up, and in a division like that, it's nonstop tough fights for him. So, all in all, he won the fight. I didn't think he won the night, though, if that makes sense. And maybe that's just the way things are gonna work when he fights outside of England. You know, the pop was somewhat there, but it just kind of went away. And when he fights in England, it just feels like on Monday morning. That's when we're all still talking about it. Maybe that's just the way it is when he doesn't fight in England. But it was okay. I didn't think he lost anything there.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I basically agree with these guys. I mean, it wasn't best case scenario. It wasn't worst case scenario either. I think the way he handled it, as far as like what he said after the fight, before the fight, endeared him to a slight degree. I mean, definitely was not the same guy we saw a year ago after his fight with Jared Gordon. So I think it was fine. He didn't make us sad by like completely knocking out and damaging Tony to a brutal degree. So I think it was fine for what it was. This was going to be a tough situation regardless for him, but I think all things considered, he came out of it pretty well, and now he can move on to something more relevant and has a signature win as far as a name on his resume. So I was fine with it. I wouldn't be too mad if I was Paddy Pimblett on this Monday morning.
What about you, Danny? I think he came in as the B side, played it cool all week, snapped at him when he had to at the press conference. Tried to give him some respect after the fight. He gave him that stare, kind of like, "Hey, let's hug it out." You know, Tony wanted none of it. Then at the end, he got his hug and his handshake and everything. And it looked like he left as the A side. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this was a win for him. I mean, this was a big pay-per-view, the final pay-per-view of the year. He was able to be on the main card. He was able to fight in Las Vegas in the U.S. He picked up a pretty clear and dominant win, left without a scratch pretty much. Having Tony Ferguson on your resume is always something good, no matter the state. It still looks good having a former interim champion in there. And let's not forget, he was coming off a big injury where he had to get foot surgery. This is probably the closest thing you can get to a tune-up fight in a return. You don't want to fight a killer, not really knowing how your foot is going to be on fight night, or not fully being 100% confident. I think this was a good thing for Paddy Pimblett. You know, he gets a solid win here, a lot of exposure. He said time and time again that he was in a lose-lose situation. I think he gained a lot from this fight.